What if the last person you expected to be powerful was the one who could destroy you? A ruthless galactic assassin, known for his perfect record, is sent to kill a simple human nurse. But when her wrist tattoo glows with ancient energy, everything changes. Suddenly, the hunter becomes the prey, and the galaxy's darkest secrets are about to unfold. The hunt had begun. Across the expanse of space, whispers of the most efficient assassin in the galaxy had reached every corner of the known universe. For decades, Cade was the name spoken in hushed tones, feared by kings, mercenaries, and warlords alike. No one ever escaped his grasp. His skills were unmatched. He was cold, methodical, and a perfectionist. And now, his latest target was a human nurse, Lila Parker, a name as common as any, with no discernible distinction in a galaxy full of strange beings and far-reaching threats. She was living on a remote medical station, a small speck of humanity lost amidst the stars. It was supposed to be an easy mission, a quiet kill, in and out, with no resistance. A perfect assignment for someone with Cade's skill set. But Cade had underestimated one thing, the power that would rise from the simplest of humans. He adjusted his gloves, his fingers grazing the cold metal of his weapons. His eyes scanned the data screen again. There were no reports of heavy security around the station, no significant guards. Just Lila, the nurse, who had no idea that her peaceful existence was about to come to an end. But something gnawed at him. The mission didn't feel right. Not the target. Not the ease of it all. It felt too simple. He didn't question it. Simplicity was often the key to the most effective operations. The best assassinations were always the ones that seemed too easy. Cade didn't need complexity. He didn't need a reason. He only needed the job done. Lila Parker sat alone in the quiet of the station's med bay, surrounded by sterile white walls that hummed with the soft vibrations of the advanced medical equipment. Her hands were steady as she worked, stitching up a patient's wounds. Another routine day in her life. There was nothing special about the work she did. No glory, no fame. Just the quiet, endless cycle of helping those who passed through her doors. But even in her solitude, Lila felt it. The strange sensation, like the hum of a distant energy she couldn't quite place. Her wrist, always hidden beneath the sleeve of her uniform, seemed to buzz occasionally, though she'd never been able to explain it. It had been with her since she was a child, a strange, intricate tattoo that always felt more like a pulse than ink on her skin. But Lila was too busy to dwell on it. She had patients to care for, wounds to heal, lives to save. It was a life she had embraced after years of searching for purpose. What she didn't know was that tattoo was not a mere decoration. It was an inheritance, one that had been passed down from an ancient human civilization, now lost to time. The power that lay dormant in her wrist was far beyond her understanding. The assassin was closing in. Cade moved swiftly through the station's dimly lit corridors, his steps making no sound. His cloak blended seamlessly with the shadows, and he felt the familiar thrill of the hunt coursing through him. He knew the layout of the station like the back of his hand. He'd studied every inch, every corner. His target was in the medical wing, just as the intel had promised. He'd already neutralized 2 guards, quick, efficient. Nothing stood in his way. But as he neared the med bay, something in the air shifted. A subtle change, like the press of an invisible weight. His instincts kicked in. Cade paused, his fingers twitching over the hilt of his blade. It was a strange sensation, one he hadn't felt before, and it unsettled him. There was something else here. Something beyond the ordinary. He adjusted his position, his back against the wall, eyes narrowing as he peered into the med bay. Lila was still focused on her patient, oblivious to the danger that stalked her. Cade reached for his wrist communicator to confirm the target's exact position, but before he could activate it, a sudden surge of energy ripped through the station, the force of it pulling at his senses. His heartbeat quickened. It came from her, from the human woman. And for the first time in his long career, Cade felt the chilling sensation of uncertainty. Lila finished her work, carefully cleaning her hands as she looked over the patient one final time. The strange sensation in her wrist intensified, but she didn't have time to analyze it. She had more work to do. As she reached for a syringe, she heard it, footsteps, quiet but deliberate. Something was wrong. She turned toward the door, her pulse quickening. The sense that she was being watched was overwhelming. Before she could react, the door to the med bay opened. Cade stepped into the room, his shadow falling across the threshold. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The sharp gleam of his weapon said everything. But before he could move, Lila's wrist tattoo flared to life, glowing with an eerie light that filled the room. Cade froze. Something was wrong. Lila's eyes locked with his, a calmness in her gaze that should have been impossible for someone in her situation. But she wasn't afraid. And that, more than anything, was what made Cade question everything. Cade had never been stopped before, not once in his entire career. But as he stood frozen in the doorway of the med bay, something in the air had shifted. A surge of energy so foreign, so overwhelming, that it rattled his senses. His blade, poised and ready, lowered in his hand, his instincts struggling to comprehend what he was feeling. Fear? Doubt? He wasn't sure. But he hadn't felt this way in decades. Lila stood across from him, her expression unreadable. The glowing symbol on her wrist pulsed in time with a strange force that had swept through the room. It was as if the very air around them had thickened, alive with a power Cade could not place. The hum of energy washed over him, and he took an involuntary step back. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. What is that? Cade whispered, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the unnatural stillness that now filled the room. Lila's gaze remained steady, almost knowing. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, the assassin wondered if she wasn't as innocent as she appeared. The pulse of light from her tattoo seemed to flicker again, and with it, a heavy weight lifted from the room. Cade's mind raced. He had done his research. He knew what human medical stations looked like. He had studied Lila's movements, her patterns. He had known she was just a nurse, just a simple human. Yet the calmness in her eyes, the way she seemed untouched by the chaos of the moment, spoke to something far deeper than her profession. "What are you?" he asked, this time louder, his voice losing some of its usual composure. His sharp, tactical mind was scrambling. He had seen countless species, heard hundreds of myths, but none of them matched this. None of them explained why the simple touch of her wrist could send an entire room into disarray. Lila's eyes flickered to the door behind him, where the soft shuffle of boots could be heard. The station was on alert now, but Cade was too transfixed by the power of the moment to even think of escape. The pulse from her wrist had unsettled him deeply. "I'm no one important," she said, her voice calm and steady, like she had said the same line 1,000 times before. "Just a nurse. Just trying to get through the day." Cade's eyes narrowed. Her words were ordinary, but her demeanor was far from it. "You're lying," he said, stepping closer. His blade was still in his hand, but now it felt heavier, like it no longer belonged to him. His grip tightened around it instinctively, but the discomfort grew. The tattoo on her wrist flared once again, and Cade felt a sudden shift in the energy. It was subtle at first, but then it hit him, a wave of something almost tangible. Power. Ancient power. He had felt something like this only once before, long ago, when he had stood before a revered warlord whose entire army was said to possess an ability to tap into forgotten forces. That power had been fleeting, an echo of something long past. But this was different. It was real. "I don't want any trouble," Lila said, the light from her wrist fading as the room returned to its previous state. She made a slow movement toward the med bay's counter, where a medical tool lay discarded. But the assassin's eyes never left her. He knew that look. She was playing a dangerous game. She was hiding something, and Cade's patience for secrets was wearing thin. "You don't get it, do you?" he asked, his tone sharp as he took another step forward. "That symbol, it's not just decoration. It's not just a tattoo. That power you have, it's what I'm here to stop." Lila stiffened, but didn't flinch. Her fingers wrapped around the edge of the counter as she glanced back at him. "I don't know what you're talking about." Cade's gaze was piercing, his cold eyes assessing every motion, every slight change in her expression. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. The moment stretched into something that felt beyond the ordinary. Lila took a breath, as if steeling herself for something inevitable. "I don't know why this is happening," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of truth. "I don't even know what that tattoo really is." Cade's mind raced. Could it be that she was telling the truth? Could she be just another human, lost in the vastness of space, unaware of the ancient powers locked inside her? He had learned not to trust anyone, especially his targets. But something about Lila's words rang with an unsettling sincerity. "You really don't know?" Cade asked, his voice a low growl. She shook her head. "I've had it since I was a child. It's always been there, always pulsing. But I never understood why. Not until now." Cade's grip on his blade relaxed slightly. It wasn't weakness. It was confusion, something he wasn't used to feeling. He had been trained to see through lies, to pierce the facades. Yet before him stood someone who didn't seem to be lying, but who was capable of something far greater than any nurse or any human should be. He took a slow step back. He wasn't sure why, but he needed to think. Suddenly, a beeping sound echoed from the station's comm system, a harsh alert that shattered the fragile tension in the room. A voice crackled through, breaking through Cade's trance. "We've detected an anomaly, something strange. Station security is compromised. The target has activated a power source. All units converge on Medical Bay." Cade's sharp gaze shifted to Lila. She had no idea what she was about to become, a beacon that would light up the entire station. And then he realized the truth. Lila wasn't just a nurse. She was a catalyst. And everything he knew was about to change. Cade felt the surge before he heard the alarms. It was a hum, a deep vibration in the air that shook his bones. The station systems blared in frantic rhythm, but the assassin's senses were sharp enough to cut through the chaos. He had faced danger countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the unnatural force rising from Lila. The pulsating light from her wrist tattoo flared again, and with it, the walls seemed to bend. The very air felt charged, as if it had been electrified. Cade instinctively raised his hand to his face, the heat of the energy radiating against his skin. He'd been in the presence of power before, but this was different. This was something ancient, something far older than he had imagined. Lila stood motionless, her eyes closed as if she were in deep concentration. Her body seemed almost to glow with an inner light, the strange tattoo casting a faint, eerie halo around her wrist. She was no longer just a nurse. Cade was beginning to understand that, but he couldn't yet comprehend the full scope of what she was, or what she was capable of. "Stop," Cade said, his voice low, almost a growl. "This ends now." But Lila didn't respond. Instead, her hand lifted slowly, as if she were reaching out to something that only she could see. Her fingers curled slightly, and the energy in the room seemed to respond. The temperature in the med bay dropped, and a low rumble vibrated through the floor. Cade's training kicked in. The lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance around them, and he moved before his mind could catch up. In a single motion, he closed the distance, weapon in hand. But when he swung, it was as if the air itself pushed back against him, a barrier that he couldn't break through. He staggered, surprised by the force that held him back. The tattoo on Lila's wrist flared again, and the pressure intensified. His grip on his weapon tightened, but it felt like fighting against an invisible wall. "Don't," Cade said, his voice hoarse, but this time there was a trace of hesitation in it. He had never felt hesitation before. He wasn't sure what was happening, but instinct told him he needed answers. Lila's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, Cade saw fear in them. It was a fleeting emotion, quickly replaced by determination. She turned toward him, her hand lowering as the energy in the room began to subside. The pressure lifted, and the hum in the air softened, but the tension between them was thicker than ever. "I don't know what's happening," Lila said, her voice quieter now, the strength of the energy fading from her tone. "I don't understand any of this." Cade studied her, the assassin's mind working furiously. She had felt the power surge, too. Her fear was real, but it was not for herself. It was for something else, something she hadn't yet realized. "What is that thing on your wrist?" he asked, his voice cutting through the stillness. Lila's hand instinctively moved to cover the symbol, the faint glow now dimming to nothing more than a shadow of what it had been moments ago. She seemed to consider his question, her brows furrowed in confusion. "I've had it my entire life," she replied, her voice small, uncertain. "It's a tattoo, but not like any normal tattoo. It's been there since I was a child, and I thought it was just a birthmark. I never knew," she trailed off, her gaze drifting toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Cade's eyes narrowed. A tattoo that could control energy? That wasn't possible. He had heard rumors, sure, of ancient human relics with unimaginable power. But to find one so deeply embedded in someone so ordinary, it didn't add up. "You think it's just a birthmark?" Cade asked, disbelief threading through his words. His hand tightened on the hilt of his weapon once more, the cold metal grounding him. "That thing is far from ordinary." Lila met his gaze then, her eyes desperate. "I don't know what it is," she said, "but I don't want any part of it. I just want to help people. I didn't ask for this." Cade stepped back, his mind already working. Her reluctance was clear. She didn't know how to control the power, but that didn't change the fact that it was there. And now it was undeniably tied to her. Her ancestors had hidden the source of this power for a reason, and Lila was about to learn why. The low rumble from earlier intensified again, this time accompanied by a harsh, mechanical whine. Cade glanced toward the door. "They're coming," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're not safe here." Lila's eyes widened, and she looked toward the door, but Cade didn't wait. Without another word, he grabbed her arm, his grip firm but gentle. "We need to move," he said, urgency in his voice. Lila hesitated for only a moment, then nodded, her expression stealing with determination. She wasn't ready for what was to come, but neither was Cade. Together, they left the med bay, the growing chaos outside waiting to pull them into a future neither of them had prepared for. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the last of the med bay's chaos. Cade's hand was still wrapped around Lila's wrist, pulling her through the narrow hallways of the station. He didn't know who was coming for her, but he knew it wasn't anyone with good intentions. The low hum of the station's security alarms echoed in the corridors, and his sharp instincts screamed that they didn't have much time. Lila stumbled slightly as she was yanked along, her mind racing to catch up with the situation. She could feel the strange, pulsing sensation in her wrist again, but this time it was different, more insistent. The power was stirring, and she didn't know how to stop it. "Where are we going?" she gasped, her voice tight with fear and confusion. Cade didn't answer immediately. His eyes were scanning every shadow, every corner. He could feel the presence of others, footsteps echoing in the distance. The station was alive with activity, but the noise seemed to grow more distant with every step they took. "We need to get to a safe room," he finally muttered. "A place where no one can track us. If you want answers, we need to make sure we're not caught." Lila's mind was still spinning. "Answers?" she echoed, almost in disbelief. "I'm just a nurse. I don't have any answers." Cade's gaze flickered to her, his eyes hard but not unkind. "You're more than that. You have something inside of you that's bigger than this station, bigger than anything I've ever encountered. And I need to know what it is." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The tattoo on her wrist throbbed in response, as if to affirm Cade's words. Her confusion was growing with every passing second. She had always known that there was something different about the mark on her skin, but she had never imagined it was anything like this. Cade's eyes scanned the hallway, and his grip on her wrist tightened as they turned another corner. The security systems were being overridden now, the lights flickering intermittently as the alarm systems went into overdrive. He cursed under his breath. They were running out of time. Lila felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Who are they?" "The people after me." "They're not just people," Cade said, his voice colder now. "They're after the power you're carrying. You have something they want, something that could shift the balance of everything." Lila's brow furrowed. I don't understand. I'm just a nurse. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, Cade replied, his tone softening for a moment. But you're not just anyone. The tattoo on your wrist, it's not just a marking. It's an artifact. And if I'm right, it's part of something much larger. They reached a narrow doorway at the end of the hall, and Cade motioned for Lila to stay close as he slipped inside. The room was small, lit only by the dim emergency lights. He activated a security lock on the door and turned to her. Lila blinked, still trying to catch her breath. You're telling me that this tattoo, this thing, is an artifact? She shook her head in disbelief. But why me? Cade didn't immediately answer. He walked to a console at the far side of the room and began typing furiously. As he worked, he spoke. You're part of a lineage that's been hidden for centuries, he said, his voice low. An ancient human lineage, one that was thought to be extinct. Your ancestors weren't just regular humans. They were keepers of knowledge, of power. And that tattoo on your wrist? It's a key to something they built. Lila's mind reeled. This is insane. I'm just me. I have no family, no heritage. Just my past as a nurse. This can't be true. Cade paused his work and looked up at her, his expression grim. You don't have to believe me now, but everything about you says otherwise. The station wouldn't be reacting like this if you weren't the key. That symbol, that power, it's not just some relic. It's a weapon. A weapon that can change the fate of the galaxy. Lila took a step back, her hands trembling. But I don't know how to control it. I don't know anything about it. Cade's gaze softened, but only for a moment. I didn't think you would. But that's why we need to find out everything we can. We're not the only ones looking for you, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want. The weight of his words hit Lila like a ton of bricks. She felt like she was falling into an abyss, the ground slipping away beneath her feet. She had no idea who she was, what she was supposed to do, or what she had become. Who's after me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Cade's lips curled into a tight line. A group of powerful beings, alien factions, mercenaries, and others who have been tracking the artifact for years. They believe your ancestors were part of a galactic war that could bring them ultimate power. And now that you're alive, they'll do anything to harness that power. Lila's head spun, and she stumbled, nearly collapsing against the wall. She had never asked for any of this. She had only wanted to help, to heal. But now, she was caught in something that was so much bigger than herself. Cade moved toward her, his expression softening. I know it's a lot, but I promise you, I won't let them take you. Not without a fight. Lila looked at him, her eyes searching for some kind of reassurance. She didn't know who to trust, but Cade was the only one who seemed to understand the storm that was swirling inside of her. I don't know what to do, she said quietly, her voice cracking. Cade placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. We survive. We fight. And we find out what this power means for you, for humanity, and for the galaxy. As the door to the safe room clicked shut behind them, Lila realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The ground shook beneath them, the walls vibrating with the force of the incoming assault. Cade's grip tightened around his weapon as he stood in the middle of the darkened chamber, his eyes locked on Lila. The air between them was heavy, charged with a force neither of them fully understood. But one thing was clear, the time for answers was over. The enemies were at the gates. Lila's wrist tattoo pulsed with a low, steady light, casting strange shadows on the walls around them. Her gaze flickered to the glowing symbols, then back to Cade, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. They're coming, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of the attack. Cade nodded, his expression hardening. He had spent years moving through the shadows, hunting enemies and neutralizing threats. But nothing had prepared him for this. The power Lila carried was like nothing he had ever encountered, a force capable of toppling the very balance of the galaxy. They won't stop, Cade said, his voice low but steady. Not until they get what they want. And what they want is you. Lila's eyes darted to the door, where the sounds of the alien assault grew louder with every passing second. The walls around them were already beginning to tremble as the station's outer defenses buckled under the onslaught. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice cracking with frustration. "I don't even know what it means." Cade moved toward her, his hand resting on her shoulder with an unexpected gentleness. "I know, but now you have to use it. We don't have a choice." Lila's gaze shifted to the distant shadows, and for a moment, she seemed to lose herself in the weight of what was happening. The enemies closing in weren't just mercenaries. They were members of an ancient alien faction, one that had hunted for the artifact embedded in her wrist for centuries. Their desire for its power was insatiable, and now they had found her. A sharp crackling sound filled the room as the doors to the chamber began to buckle, the metal screeching as if under pressure. Cade turned to face it, his body tensing. "This is it," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Get ready." Lila felt the power in her wrist stir again, the symbol pulsing as if it were alive. She had no control over it, no understanding of how to wield it. But instinct told her that if they were going to survive, she had to try. The door burst open with a deafening roar, revealing a group of heavily armed alien mercenaries, their weapons aimed directly at them. Cade moved first, his training kicking in as he swept into action, neutralizing the nearest enemy with precise, deadly force. But there were too many of them. Too many for even Cade to handle on his own. Lila stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to fight. But the tattoo on her wrist flared once more, its light brightening, sending a pulse of energy through the room. The mercenaries faltered, a wave of disorientation rippling through them, as if the very air had changed. Cade didn't hesitate. He dove toward her, his movements swift as he pushed her to the side, using his body as a shield. "Focus," he shouted over the chaos. "The power is inside you. You have to control it." The aliens regrouped, their weapons drawn once more, but the sudden shift in the energy around them had thrown them off balance. Lila's eyes widened as the energy in the room shifted again, but this time she could feel it. It was like a current, running through her veins, connecting her to everything in the space around her. She had no idea how she was doing it, but she could sense the power now. The ancient power. It was hers. The mercenaries advanced, but Lila didn't flinch. With a deep breath, she raised her hand, the light from her wrist glowing brighter than ever. The energy surged, crackling through the air as a shock wave erupted from her, knocking the attackers back. The force was so intense that it sent the mercenaries crashing to the ground, their weapons skittering across the floor. For a moment, there was silence, a heavy, stunned silence. Cade stood, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it." Lila stared down at her wrist, the glowing symbol dimming slightly as the energy settled. She didn't understand it, but she knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The mercenaries weren't finished. As they began to rise, Lila's wrist pulsed again, sending another wave of energy crashing through the room. This time, the blast was stronger, more controlled. The aliens crumpled under the force, unable to withstand the power she wielded. Cade watched, his expression unreadable. "There's more to you than I thought," he said, his voice a mix of awe and wariness. Lila lowered her hand, the energy fading, but her heart still racing. She had no idea what she had just done, but the surge of power was intoxicating. She could feel it inside her, waiting, ready to be unleashed again. "We need to move," Cade said, his voice cutting through the moment. "They'll send more, and we're not safe here." "Not yet." Lila nodded, her mind still reeling. She had just fought back against the very thing that had been hunting her for years, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just a victim of fate. She was part of something much bigger than herself. And that something was just getting started. The pulse of energy from Lila's wrist sent shock waves through the chamber, but the battle wasn't over. In the distance, alien ships loomed, towering, menacing. Outside the reinforced walls of the underground base, their fleet was closing in. But inside, Lila stood ready. She wasn't the frightened nurse she had once been. She was something far more dangerous. Cade's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. The glow from Lila's wrist faded, but he could feel the charge in the air. She had unlocked something within herself, something ancient and powerful. He could see it now, the power coursing through her veins, the energy that had once terrified her now, becoming part of who she was. "This is it," Cade said, his voice low, steady. "We hold this ground, or we lose everything." Lila nodded, her expression hardening as she stepped forward, her every movement brimming with newfound confidence. The power was hers to control now, and with it, the potential to reshape the galaxy. "They'll be coming for us soon," Cade continued, his gaze flicking to the door as the low hum of alien forces grew louder. "We need to get to the relic before they do. If we can activate it, we might have a chance." Lila's heart pounded, but it wasn't fear she felt now. It was determination. For the first time since this journey had begun, she felt like she understood her purpose. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a weapon, a force capable of changing everything. "Let's go," Lila said, her voice clear and unwavering. They moved quickly, their steps echoing in the quiet of the underground base. The walls were lined with ancient technology, relics of a time long past, but Lila's focus was on the task ahead. They had to reach the heart of the base, the place where the relic, the key to humanity's future, was hidden. As they moved deeper into the heart of the complex, Cade spoke again. "You're not just fighting for yourself now. What's inside you, it's humanity's last chance. If we don't take control of this power, the galaxy will fall into chaos. These alien factions, they want to control it. They'll stop at nothing to see that it doesn't fall into human hands." Lila's grip on her wrist tightened, the tattoo pulsing faintly once again. The weight of Cade's words settled over her like a cloak. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for the future. For a future where humanity could stand tall among the stars. She couldn't let it slip away now, not when she was so close. They reached the central chamber, a vast, cavernous room lined with forgotten technology. In the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, its surface etched with ancient symbols that matched the design of Lila's tattoo. It was the final piece, the key to unlocking the full power of the artifact. The moment Lila stepped into the room, the energy from her wrist flared to life once more. The walls trembled, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with anticipation. Cade stepped back, his hand on his weapon as the energy in the room shifted, thickening with every second. "Do it," Cade urged, his voice a command now. "Activate it. If you're going to do this, now is the time." Lila approached the pedestal, her hand outstretched. She didn't know what she was doing, not exactly, but the power inside her was guiding her, pushing her forward. As her fingers brushed the pedestal, the symbols on the surface lit up, glowing with an intensity that took her breath away. The air crackled as the energy from her wrist connected with the pedestal, sending a surge of light throughout the room. It felt like the entire base was coming alive, as if the very foundation of the place was reacting to the power Lila was now controlling. The glow from her tattoo intensified, and for a brief moment she felt connected to everything. The ancient technology, the energy of the base, the very fabric of the galaxy itself. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. A deafening sound filled the room, and Cade's voice cut through the noise. "They're here. We don't have much time." Lila's focus never wavered. She couldn't stop now. The relic was awakening, and with it, the power to change everything. She reached out further, placing both hands on the pedestal. The symbols on her wrist began to mirror those on the relic, and as they aligned, a massive pulse of energy erupted from the pedestal. The shock wave sent a ripple through the entire base, and for a moment it felt as though the very fabric of reality was bending. Cade raised his weapon, ready for the incoming attack, but Lila was no longer the helpless nurse she had once been. With the power of the relic flowing through her, she felt invincible. The doors to the chamber exploded open, and the alien forces poured in, but Lila was ready. With a wave of her hand, the energy from her wrist surged forward, sending a wave of power that knocked the invaders off their feet. The air around them crackled with energy as Lila stood at the center, her eyes glowing with the force of the relic. Cade's voice was filled with awe as he watched her. This is just the beginning. Lila turned to him, her expression hard but determined. It's only the beginning. But we're ready. The battle for humanity's future had begun, and Lila was no longer just a pawn in a war she didn't understand. She was the one who would decide its outcome. And as the energy from the relics surged around her, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity was about to rise.